Look, we have 46 chromosomes, right?
Right. Chimpanzees have 48.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They discovered that chromosome number 2 was taken out. They call it an artificial mutation. They mean geneticists. Fused together and 2 telomere caps put on, 1 telomere cap on each side. Who in the world took chromosome number 2 out, fused it together, and put telomere caps on it? And they say that it happened as an estimated 200,000 years ago, right at the time that the Sumerian tablets say they decided to make mankind to do the labor. There's no coincidence that the tablets are aligning with modern science. And this means that a couple things. The first thing, it means that we were genetically modified. The second thing that it means is the telomere caps limit our lifespan to about 120 years max, according to Harvard scientists. Now, in the Bible, what does it say? It says that my seed shall not abide in man forever. His years shall be 120. That was taken from the Sumerian tablets, even further back than that, thousands of years before the Bible was written, when Yahweh, a.k.a. Enlil, shows back up, sees the human beings building a tower into the heavens, copying a tower that they themselves had built. It pissed him off, and he said, whatever their hearts decide to do, they shall achieve it. My seed shall not abide in man. His years shall be 120. And then he did a genetic modification at that point, I believe, with the telomeres, and he spread mankind out around the planet, and he confused their languages. He had us speaking different languages, so we couldn't collaborate. Now we're in competition, no collaboration, divide and conquer.
And there's the Tower of Babel.
That's it. That's it, man.
So it was all done just to keep us from rising.
Yes. We were advancing too fast, and he had to slow us down. If we shorten their lifespan, then they won't have enough time. By the time they realize who they are and what power they have, they'll be dead. And see, that's what's happened to us.
So the craziest version of this story is that they genetically engineered us out of lower primates and put us here to mine gold.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then established different types of civilizations and taught us how to build things, taught us all these different things. And enough time has passed that we've kind of forgotten. Mm-hmm. Enough time has passed. That's the wackiest version of it, right?
Right. That's the bare bones minimum.
Yeah, the wackiest version is they made us, mm-hmm. which is, we've talked about this a couple of times, but how bizarre it is that human beings have this incredible fascination for gold. Mm-hmm. We're fascinated with gold. Yeah. This fascination with gold is really weird. Mm-hmm. Like, why back when it was basically useless? You couldn't make a knife out of it. You couldn't, it didn't make sense that this would be so valuable. Just because it's rare, you're barely alive. We're going, We're going back to full-on hunter and gatherer, our ancestors with spears and stone chipped. And then after that, gold emerges, mm-hmm. and it stays. Yeah. It stays forever. Yeah. Now, when you read Zecharia Sitchin's book, he talks about this in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. His description of it was that they needed to suspend gold particles in the atmosphere mm-hmm. because their atmosphere was being destroyed.
Right.
Then you move to somewhere around the 2000s when climate scientists start proposing this idea mm-hmm. of suspending reflective particles in the atmosphere.
Right.
And then when you realize the unique properties of gold, how unusual it is in terms of a building material, you can coat things. Mm-hmm. The reason why things are coated in gold, gold plated rather, you can take a tiny piece of gold and cover an enormous area with it. It's a strange metal. Yeah. Really weird. Mm-hmm. And what, the supposed story is, it's very common on Earth, very rare on Nibiru.
Right. Yeah, that's the story. And now when I started looking into this gold thing myself, and here's what I came up with. So when you start analyzing the text, you discover that there was an encampment in a place called South Africa at Adam's Calendar. Okay. Now, at Adam's Calendar, there's actually the very first gold mines discovered. They're dating them back to about 200,000 years ago. And that's incredible because there's a building there that looks like a worn down structure. Now, in the tablets, it talks about the fact that the Ijiji, who were the working class Anunnaki beings who were cleaning out the Euphrates and Tigris River so they can create irrigation and, create a bustling civilization. Also, they were doing the actual construction themselves. No people needed, just them working. They were like the construction workers, and Anu and Enki and Enlil, these leader gods, were like, the foremen, the master architects and so forth, right? The boss. So these people were working, but they weren't supposed to be enslaved. They were volunteers. They got tired of doing the work, according to them, for about 250,000 years of labor on Earth, and also, according to them, on Mars. This is in the text. They call it Lamu. And so they decided to go to war against Enki and Lil and Anu because their demands had not been met. So they went to meet them in the Epic of Atrahasis. They go to Adam's calendar. They go to that same structure that was discovered where that gold mine is located. I was like, holy crap, there is some link here to gold. Specifically, exactly, I don't know. But I know if you're an advanced civilization, you need gold. And the people that you have working it for you probably think, it's to adorn or to adorn yourself or in recognition of the gods. So they'll wear it and they'll utilize it, but not for technology. But what's crazy is they go to war, they go to get ready to go to battle. And then Enki says, I have an idea that will stop this war. There's an existing being on this planet. Existing, not something that doesn't exist, existing. We can add our essence to it with a slain god. So they're talking about taking the DNA or genetics from one of themselves and mixing it with the DNA of the hominid that was here. It's not specified whether it was, an ape man or anything, but they don't specify in the tablets. But to create a worker being. And they began to do this genetic modification, probably disconnecting some of our DNA, making genetic modifications to us to get us to take orders from them. They inserted something called a worship gene, which was just discovered recently, that human beings have a gene inside of them that can be turned on and turned off. It can be turned off in a laboratory setting. It can also be turned off with a magnetic field around your head. And when it's off, you don't want to worship anything outside of yourself. You look inside. And when it's on, you look to get something from the outside. So this is incredible. And so they made us worship people.
Gene
yes.
inside of us to make us worship them. Wow, how genius.
That's incredible, because then you're not a slave anymore. You're doing this for the honor of the gods.
And for people who think all this talk is really crazy, I want to put into perspective that we talked about this the other day, that during which war was it where the Soviet Union was experimenting? It was scientists in the Soviet Union, correct? They're experimenting with creating a chimpanzee human being hybrid that they would probably send to war.
Yeah.
So instead of having regular people, we would make this monster, this freak, ape man, and send him to war and have him crush the enemies.
Yeah.
It's like how crazy is that? They knew how strong chimps are. I got an idea. Let's turn a chimp human, and that way, if he dies, who gives a fuck?
Right.
We made him. Get him to go to work for us.
Yeah.
And now if you're a supremely enlightened being, wouldn't you think of human beings with all of our folly and all of our chaos and all of our war and bullshit and the internet and disinformation and misinformation? Wouldn't you think of us kind of the same way we would think about that chimp hybrid thing?
Yeah.
If I was I was the president of Russia, I want my cousins to go to war?
No.
Or I want to send this freak that I made in a lab?
Yeah, and what's interesting, I'm glad you said made in a lab. They had talked briefly in that text about fashioning people. In other words, almost
How did they say it?
They said the word fashioning. Fashioning a being.
What was do you remember the actual quote?
I would have to look it up, the actual quote.
But they describe it as fashion.
Fashioning, because they said even the lamb hadn't been fashioned yet, so they had fashioned lambs. So they fashioned, and it's also in the Epic of Gilgamesh, they fashioned the friend that Gilgamesh went on the journey with. He wasn't born from a woman's womb. They created him. They created him an artificial being to go on this journey in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So they used that phrase several times in the tablets. But they said, no, wait. So it was almost like that's not a good idea, because in some ways it seems as if they had known that the idea of making these too many artificially created people wouldn't be a good idea. Now, they didn't go deeper than that, but you can see where we are today with AI and everything else and these robots that are coming. Maybe they knew something about that, but they decided to take a biological being and genetically modify and program that to do the work, and that's exactly what they did.
Well, if they really knew what we would be capable of and that we would be illogical, overpopulation would be a gigantic issue. And in many parts, it's not really that big of an issue here except for in cities, but in many parts of the world, it's the whole country.
Yeah.
The whole country is New York City, which is just fucking bonkers. And you got to it's actually not true. It's not even that bad, even in China. China has a lot of open space. But when you're in those cities, they are massive and they are filled with people.
Yeah.
And that is probably what you'd imagine a higher being would do if it was like us, kind of illogical and kind of a little bit reckless and has a little bit too much technology for the average person that didn't develop the technology. But all of a sudden you got some 85 IQ dope who has access to all the things that all these geniuses have created.
Yeah.
You could figure. We talked to Michio Kaku. He built a nuclear reactor in his house when he was a kid.
I heard about that. That was crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I know.
That's so crazy. But there's a lot of different stuff that you can do and have access to technology that is beyond anything you would ever be able to invent with your own mind. But because we share things across the board, you would imagine that if you were an enlightened being from another planet that's a million years more advanced than us, you'd go, I see where this one's going. You know, like you have that cousin who's an alcoholic and then he wins the lottery, like, oh shit, Derek just won the lottery. Fuck. This is going to be crazy. Derek's got $200 million. Right. It's going to be fucking insane.
It's crazy. And they knew they were going outside their own guidelines and their own laws, their parameters, because they made a statement in the text. They said the creator of all is going to punish them, or they would have to answer to the creator of all for what they did here. So, and that lets you know they weren't really gods. They knew themselves that they weren't the creator of the universe, but that they masqueraded as gods on this planet.
Just like we did when different versions of human civilization would find primitive tribes, like the cargo tribe,
cults.
The cargo cult that you talked about in your documentary. Yeah. That is so fascinating that during World War II, planes landed on these remote places, and these people built mock planes to show like what the thing was that came to visit them that they thought were like gods.
Wild.
Do you think that if the Anunnaki are real and if Nibiru really exists and there's another planet with highly intelligent beings that are far more advanced than us, if that's the case, do you think there's more advanced and more just like we are to chimpanzees, they are to us, and then another race is to them, and then it just keeps going on and on forever until you're God?
Absolutely. I believe there's levels to the game, just like there's levels in terms of how we live on this planet. We have the first world, second world, third world, just here on Earth. Now magnify that as a fractal, as a universe as a whole. You have civilizations that are 1 million, 2 million, maybe even 1 billion years ahead, and every universe every civilization progressing within the universe at a specific rate. So you can have beings that have already maybe even shed their corporeal bodies and only exist as beings of energetic light, and then you have everything all the way back down towards us.
So